Hey creeps, welcome back to Library Macabre. Let me just put these down real quick. Hey, how's it going? You're probably here for another bookshelf tour, aren't you? We can do that. I mean, it's been a little while since part one, and it's not like I have anything else better to do in this place. Trapped in this library, unable to get out, so may as well look at every single book I own. Let's go ahead and get started with part two of my horror bookshelf tour. Here we are with the next shelf in my horror bookshelf tour. I went over this shelf last time, so this is the one we are looking at right now. So here we have a Funko Pop figure of Dracula. Of course, that's Bela Lugosi Dracula. I think this figure is out of print now. Really happy that I have one of those. We also have Eden by Tim Levin. We All Scream for Ice Cream by Lou Yardley. The Valancourt Book of Victorian Ghost Stories, Volume 2, edited by Alan Grove. Darkest Hours by Mike Thorne. This is really good if you like weird fiction. And then we have The Maze by Jordan Green. Next we have 4 books from the 13 Bullets series. So we have the first book by David Wellington, 99 Coffins, 23 Hours, and 32 Fangs. I've actually not read these books. I just recently got these from a friend. Next is Voodoo Dawn by John Russo. A couple of books by Tim Meyer. We have The Switch House and Black Star Constellations. Sorry for the glare, I'm using my ring light. Black River Lantern by Alex Grass, and The Toll by Sherry Priest. Now we're going to look at the books in the back row. On this end, I have all of my Cemetery Gates media books. So we have At the Cemetery Gates, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Tales from Valley View Cemetery. Corpse Cold, All New American Folklore. These are all by John Bruel and Joe Sullivan. These are really good if you like scary stories to tell in the dark style books. These are nice throwbacks to those. Moving on with the Cemetery Gates media books, we have Other Voices, Other Tombs. I actually have a story in this one called The Switch. It's a kind of a horror retelling of The Parent Trap. Carol for a Haunted Man by Bruel and Sullivan. A good Christmas ghost story. Resurrection High, which I haven't read yet, but I hear this is a good coming-of-age story set in the 90s. Definitely need to read this soon. And similar to Cemetery Gates media, we have a bunch of books from Nightmare Soup. It is, again, another one of those scary stories to tell in the dark style throwbacks. So we have Nightmare Soup, Tales That Will Turn Your Stomach, Nightmare Soup 2, The Second Helping, and then these two are the Nightmare Society books. These have slightly longer stories for adult readers. Next we have a signed limited hardcover edition of A Haunted Halloween by Paul Melnick, I think is how you pronounce it. This is a really, really nice book. Like I said, it is signed by the author, and this is from Dark Regions Press. Limited to 100 copies. Greetings from Moon Hill by Anthony J. Rapina. This has some really great Halloween stories in it. Graveside Tales presents Harvest Hill, 31 Tales of Halloween Horror. This has a foreword by Al Sarantonio. Trick or Treat, a collection of spooky stories. Bad Apples 3. This is from Corpus Press. In fact, the next few books are from Corpus Press. Doorbells at Dusk, edited by Evans Light. This is a really, really good Halloween anthology. In Darkness Delight, Masters of Midnight. In Darkness Delight, Volume 2, Creatures of the Night. Hobbs' Horrific Arts and Gifts by Wendy Drinkwater. Night of the Pumpkin Man by Jack Belmont. And also by Jack Belmont, we have Santa Claus Comes Tonight. Tiny little chapbook. I actually read this past Christmas and wasn't too thrilled with it. It could have been a little longer. It's a really cool concept though. Christmas Horror, Volume 1 by Dark Regions Press. Horror Stories to Ruin Christmas by best-selling No Sleep authors. I wanted to read this at Christmas time and just did not get around to it, so maybe next year. Primordia 2, Return to the Lost World by Greg Beck. Still have to get the first book. I think I found that at a bookstore for like 50 cents. Island in the Mist by C.G. Mosley. Its sequel, Monsters in the Mist by C.G. Mosley. And the third and final book, Terror in the Mist. Into the Mist by Lee Murray. Not related to that other series I just showed you, but it is published by the same publisher. Next is a book of poetry called I Am Not Your Final Girl by Claire C. Holland. Another book of poetry, The Devil's Dreamland by Sarah Tantlinger. Cradle Land of Parasites, also by Sarah Tantlinger. Not All Monsters, edited by Sarah Tantlinger. Mannequin, Tales of Wood Made Flesh. Toys in the Attic, a collection of evil playthings, edited by Mary Genevieve Fortier, or Fortier. Unmasked by R. St. Clair. TV Dinners from Hell by Amber Fallon. Awesome cover on that one. The Auditorium, a supreme collection of the fantastical and macabre by Lee Newman. A vintage horror reprint, this is Southpaw by Frank King. The Big League, a horror novel. Such a weird cover. It's a Bad World by Curtis M. Lawson. A play on It's a Mad World. Frozen Hell by John W. Campbell Jr. And lastly, for this bookshelf, we have The End in All Beginnings by John F. D. Taff, a awesome novella collection that I highly recommend. Moving on to the next shelf, we have a couple of little Matchbox cars. These are Universal Monsters Matchbox cars. So this one is the Wolfman, and then on this one over here, we have Frankenstein. And then elsewhere in my library, I have the third in this series, which has Dracula. I'll be showing you that a little bit later. Moving on, we have another book of poetry. This is La Belle Éjar by Adrian Ernesto Cepeda. This is a book of poetry in tribute to The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson. Really cool cover on that book. The Saturday Night Ghost Club by Craig Davidson, aka Nick Cutter. Secret Santa, which was one of my favorite books of 2020. Really fun Christmas horror novel. Next we have a slasher novella. This is by David Charlesworth. It's called Deathhead Valley. Still need to read this. Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. We have a couple of vampire anthologies over here on the right. So this is The Ultimate Dracula, I, Vampire, edited by Gene Stein and Forrest J. Ackerman. The Vampire Hunter's Casebook, Bloodthirst, 100 Years of Vampire Fiction, edited by Leonard Wolfe. Starting off in the back row, we have Clawhammer by Paul Dale Anderson. This is a reprint of a vintage horror book. Lullabies for Suffering, Tales of Addiction Horror. All Smoke Rises by Mark Matthews. Wounds, 6 Stories from the Border of Hell by Nathan Bollingrud. Fat Camp by James Sabata, really fun teen slasher. Night as a Catalyst, a collection of dark fiction. This is the revised, expanded edition by Chad Lutzke, who is one of my favorite authors of all time. Adam's Ladder, an anthology of dark science fiction. Miscreations, Gods, Monsters, and Other Stories. Oversight, which is a book of novelettes by Michael Bailey. Nightmares Under the Moonlight, tiny little novella. This is one of the Shock Totem literary magazines. This is number 10 in that series. Clowns vs. Spiders by Jeff Strand. Strange Company and Others by Peter Rawlik. Entropy in Bloom by Jeremy Robert Johnson. I have a really nice signed copy of this that I got as a Nightworms exclusive prize. He wrote a nice big long message to me in there. Really cool. The Fisherman by John Langan. On the Night Border, stories by James Chambers. Haven by Tom Detty. Actually have a signed copy of this. I have a lot of signed books since I get a lot of my books from authors. I probably won't show each and every signed page, but I do have a lot of signed books throughout. Here we have Guignol, A Tale of Escalating Horror. Blood They Brought and Other Stories by Ed Kurtz. Death Obsessed by Robert Ezig. This is another signed book. How We Broke by Bracken McLeod and Paul Michael Anderson. This was a Thunderstorm Press book. That was a Nightworms exclusive, limited to 360 signed copies. And same deal for this one, Snow by Ronald Malfi. This was also a signed Nightworms exclusive book. Unmemory by Christy DeMeester. Really spooky Christmas story. Breaking the World by Jeremy Gordon. Really, really cool take on the Waco disaster. Here we have an old compilation of stories from Weird Tales magazine. Doesn't have the dust jacket. And another anthology just called Ghosts. One for the Road by Wesley Southard. Signed copy. This was a really fun heavy metal read. The Bone Mother by David Dimchuk. This was a fantastic read. Lots of Ukrainian folklore. Do have a signed copy of that. The Cormorant by Stephen Gregory. Tales of Terror and the Supernatural. A Night in the Lonesome October. Summer Chills, edited by Stephen Jones. And lastly, Allison Hewitt is Trapped. Moving on, the classic Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. A first edition of The Other by Thomas Tryon. Spook by Steve Vance. Skin by Kathy Koja. Shadow Man by the late Dennis Etchison. 100 Hair-Raising Little Horror Stories, edited by Al Sarantonio and Martin H. Greenberg. And 100 Astonishing Little Alien Stories. The Unborn by David Shobin. The Seating by David Shobin. Red Church by Scott Nicholson. Mr. Shivers by Robert Jackson Bennett. Next, we have a few Buffy books. So we have Buffy and Angel, Monster Island, Heat, Go Ask Malice, A Slayer's Diary, Tales of the Slayer, Volume 3. Next, we have a couple of these big old bind-ups. This one is Volume 1. It has Coyote Moon, Night of the Living Return, and Portal Through Time. And then this is Volume 3, which includes Carnival of Souls, One Thing or Your Mother, and Blooded. And I have a whole bunch of other Buffy books on another shelf, which I will show you in another video. And lastly, we have Charmed, the Warren Witches. Moving on to the back row, we have The Pet by Charles L. Grant. The Cold One by Christopher Pike, one of Christopher Pike's very few adult novels. The Ascending and The School, both by T.M. Wright. Vanitas, Valentine, and Moondance, all by S.P. Somtow. Moondance is actually a signed copy. Out of the House of Life by Chelsea Quinn Yarbo. The Kilrith by David J. Shao. A few books by Fred Saberhagen. We have Seance of a Vampire, A Sharpness of the Neck, and A Coldness in the Blood. A signed copy of Horror Show by Greg Kinn. Monsters in Our Midst, edited by Robert Bloch. Psycho Sanitarium, which is a licensed sequel to Psycho by Chet Williamson. Next is a beat-up hardcover book club edition of The Little People by John Christopher, which is the book that would inspire Grady Hendrix to write Paperbacks from Hell. I have actually had this book since I was a little kid. My stepdad found it at a yard sale and got it for me. Would really like to get that really cool paperback though. Cat's Eyes by Lee Jordan. Werewolf, which is just an anthology of werewolf stories. Keeper of the Children, which is a first edition hardcover. Admittedly, the paperback is much better, has a much cooler cover. I do have a copy of that in my paperback shelf, so I'll be showing that in my Paperbacks from Hell collection video. The Playroom by Gloria Murphy, and The Fungus by Harry Adam Knight. Now we're going to look at this tiny little shelf. Here I have Vespers by Jeff Rovin, Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Marino Garcia. Here is the Harper Design edition of Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is a really nice edition. Let me see if I can find some illustrations. There we go. Nice little stack of Keelan Patrick Burke. So we have Dead Leaves, 9 Tales from the Witching Season, Macabre, which is signed. Limited hardcover edition from Bad Moon Books. Another signed Keelan Patrick Burke. This is Nemesis, The Death of Timmy Quinn. a signed Cemetery Dance edition of The Turtle Boy Peregrine's Tale, and a signed copy of Night Visions, edited by Keelan Patrick Burke. And this, my friends, is where a tiny little tripod can really come in handy. This first row of books is actually all review books. I've received all of these for review pretty recently, and I've done big unboxings for them. And then half of this back row is also review books. So we have quite a few books from Horrific Tales Publishing. This is Wasteland Gods by Jonathan Woodrow, Of a Feather by Ken Goldman, Lucky's Girl by William Holloway, the first book in the Singularity Cycle, The Immortal Body, also by William Holloway, and the second book, which is called Song of the Death God. The first book of the Lucifer Falls series by Chantal Nordeluce. This is Angel Manor, and the second book, Doll Manor. And then we have House of Frozen Screams. I do have a couple more Horrific Tales books back there, but I'll get to those in a minute. Next are a whole bunch of Darcy Coates books. So we have The Haunting of Gillespie House, Dead Lake, The Haunting of Blackwood House, The Haunting of Ashburn House, The Fulcroft Ghosts, The House Next Door, The Haunting of Rookwood House, Craven Manor, The Caro Haunt, and then all 4 books in her Black Winter series. We have Voices in the Snow, Secrets in the Dark, Whispers in the Mist, and Silence in the Shadows. And then lastly, we have a few books by Macabre Inc. This is part of their Resurrected Horrors series. We have Rest in Peace by Jack McLean, I Am Dracula by C. Dean Anderson, Dead Rush by Yvonne Navarro, and Dreamthorpe by Chet Williamson. And on to the back row, we have Return from the Grave, edited by Hugh Lamb, October by Stephen Gallagher, one of my all-time favorites of Foster Homes and Flies by Chad Lutzke, beautiful book, Blind Sight by Robin Cook, Dawn by V.C. Andrews, Falling Stars by V.C. Andrews. Here we have a copy of The Abyss by Jeer Cunningham, doesn't have a dust jacket though. A few Bentley Little books, so we have The Store, The House, The Collection, and The Circle, all by Bentley Little. Widow's Point by Richard and Billy Chismar, Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. This is the Cemetery Dance signed edition. Another Cemetery Dance, we have Johnny Halloween, Tales of the Dark Season, also by Norman Partridge. And next we have the rest of my Horrific Tales books. This one is called And Cannot Come Again, Tales of Childhood, Regret, and Innocence Lost by Simon Bestwick. Leaders of the Pack, a werewolf anthology. The Cold by Rich Hawkins, Deadside Revolution by Terry Grimwood. All 3 books in the High Moor series by Graham Reynolds. We have the first book, High Moor 2, Moonstruck, and the third book, Blood Moon. Bottled Abyss by Benjamin Kane Etheridge. And lastly, this big chunky book called High Cross. And that concludes this bookshelf. I do have a couple more Horrific Tales books on my book cart, but this is where I'm going to stop with part 2 of my bookshelf tour. Thank you, creeps, so much for watching part 2 of my horror bookshelf tour. You can check back very soon for part 3, where I look at all of my Stephen King books that I have on my bookshelves. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some books to shelve. Always.